Hi, I'm Steve, and this is the Radical Centrist channel. There's an article on the Unheard blog that got me thinking about how Brexit is changing the face of our political system. I urge you to have a read of it. The link is in the description below. Brexit could see the end, or at least the total transformation, of both main political parties, for it's an issue that cuts across the traditional class and political divides. Both Labour and Conservative parties have large numbers of voters who voted Leave and Remain. Therefore, they run the real risk of falling between the crack in the middle, not pleasing anybody, sort of pleasing insufficient numbers of voters on either the Remain or the Leave side to get their candidate MPs elected at the next general election. So, for example, the traditional Labour voting North and Midland constituencies that voted massively, overwhelmingly to Leave could easily jump ship to, for example, the Brexit Party, or I guess the Conservative Party if they go, if they shift to full-on no-deal Brexit mode. Or, of course, those people could not vote at all in disillusionment that their Labour Party seems to have turned its back on them. The traditional support will just ebb away. The Labour Party doesn't seem to speak for them anymore. After all, Labour have seen their political position in Scotland change from almost total domination to virtual extinction in the space of 20 years. The same could easily happen in the North and Midland traditional Labour heartlands, as Labour are seen to vacillate over which side to support, Leave or Remain, or indeed to keep trying to spin an untenable fence-sitting position, which is where they seem to be and have been for a long time now. So the Labour leadership has a conundrum to deal with, which is almost impossible to solve without some radical change. And the conundrum is, how can we become the government of the country with a majority in the House of Commons when we'll lose seats in the North and Midlands if we're seen to be backing Remain, either overtly or by default, but we'll lose seats in the South, especially in London, unless we seem to be backing Remain. One thing is absolutely clear: Labour as a party had no idea just how many of their traditional supporters in the Midlands and North blame the EU and mass immigration for their problems. And it's hardly surprising, because Labour are run by, the political and media classes. There is virtually no one who has any real knowledge of the lower socioeconomic group classes' views at all anymore. There used to be, but not anymore. Now, if Labour had been pro-Leave at the referendum, they would have retained more of that traditional support. But instead, Corbyn, a lifelong Brexiteer, was persuaded by the likes of Keir Starmer to side with the London-centric political and media classes, and albeit in a very weak way, campaign for Remain. Now, only time will tell whether it was the right decision or not. But seemingly Labour, the idea that Labour backs the EU, the idea that Labour backs leaving the EU, but only if a deal can be struck that both the EU and a majority in Parliament can agree to, doesn't seem to have much traction in the country at the moment. It's seen as vacillating, indecisive, politicking, wanting your cake and eat it, and incompetent indeed by many hardliners on both the Remain side and on the Leave side. Similarly, the Conservative Party is hopelessly divided. As Tony Blair had to purge the old socialist values and indeed gradually drop many MPs who were a liability economically from the party, to gain the centre ground necessary to win successive general elections, so Cameron's Conservative Party moved toward the more socially progressive stance of Blair, both in its policies and in its selection of MPs, to the point where it's arguable that there's a large number of Conservative MPs that would be more than happy to have served in a Blair Labour Party, and indeed, as you can tell by the number jumping ship to the Liberal Democrats, quite happy there as well. Hence, the Conservatives, like Labour, don't know which way to go to retain the maximum number of voters, and they could easily dissolve as a single unified political party. So this situation should be easy pickings for the Lib Dems, shouldn't it? Absolutely straightforward. They should be able to massively increase their number of seats, not just double or treble, but into the three-figure numbers of seats, if not even possibly have a majority. Well, yes, it should be. That should happen, possibly, but they have some major obstacles that I'm not sure everyone's thought of that they need to overcome, particularly, as I say, in the North and the Midlands, and in other parts of the country, the more rural areas of Devon and places like that voted overwhelmingly Leave. Because obviously, anyone who voted Leave in the referendum, unless they've somehow changed their mind, they're not going to vote for the Liberal Democrats, are they? Because, the Liberal Democrats are clearly a Remain party. But anyway, it's not even that simple. It's not as simple as, well, Leave voters aren't going to vote for the party of Remain. I made a video called Forget Boris, This is the Real Problem. And I've put the link in the description below, which I'd like you to have a look at. It's not long. In it, I suggest that the social and democratic deficit clearly felt by a lot of those in the lower socioeconomic groups, that's C2, D, and E in the technical parlance, means that voters will be badly torn as to how to vote at the next election, and that we need clear plans for how to heal the social and democratic divides that are clearly present once this mess of, well, do we leave the EU or don't we, is finally cleared up, which it must be at some juncture, surely to goodness. So how does this affect the Lib Dems, who are, I think, hoping that most people that voted Remain will switch their vote to the Lib Dems at the next general election? Well, the problem is that the majority in the lower economic groups are socially conservative and against immigration, certainly in the sort of large EU open border way of immigration. But of course, the Lib Dems are socially progressive, not socially conservative, and they have little or no issue with EU open border sort of mass migration issues. Thus, even Remain voters in the lower socioeconomic groups may not want to vote Lib Dem, because from their perspective, it will be a case of, now, which of my feet am I going to shoot myself in? Well, they're not going to want to shoot themselves in either foot, are they? And this is where political radicals can come to the fore. If they are the only people, the sort of the political radical parties, saying to 50% of the population, which is roughly what the C2, D and E categories add up to, here's a clear message of how we will ensure that those at the bottom of society will benefit, and their needs and voices that will be heard. We'll throw in a great big dose of national pride, and we'll put in a nice big dose of resentment and victimhood over the way we've been treated by the EU and the way we're being treated by the political and media classes. Boom! You could get an election result which nobody sees coming, like Brexit and Trump. No one will see it coming because the higher socioeconomic groups, the political and media classes who run our society, they have no knowledge of, or, in all honesty, any genuine concern for the views, hopes, fears, aspirations of those at the bottom of society. They say they do because they want their votes, but I think the last 3 years has shown that really they're not overly interested. Now, the EU referendum also showed us that we are divided, not only in ways that we knew about, but in ways that we didn't. So okay, in terms of economics, the divide between the haves and the have-nots we sort of knew about. There's nothing particularly new there. Interestingly, Blair and Brown have pretty much accepted the capitalistic approach to the economy. I mean, they brought in, for example, university tuition fees. They noticeably increased the amount of involvement in the NHS by private companies. So they were clearly not socialist Labour by any means, certainly economically. But also democratically, because what the political classes have shown, as I say, over the last 3 years, is that the majority view only seems to win out if the elite at the top of society want it to. That's a major problem. And socially, where we have many people who don't have a party that fits their views, socially more conservative, but economically sort of centre-left. Now, let me just suggest to you how many people, particularly in those lower three economic groups, think. I mean, everyone thinks like this, but they particularly feel it, I think, at a time like this. They don't like being told that their view of life, their view of the world generally, is regressive, is stupid, is bigoted, is xenophobic, is racist, is homophobic, is deplorable, etc., etc. They find that view and that way of looking at them and their look on life as arrogant and condescending, which indeed, of course, it is. So they are socially conservative, but they do like the idea of getting a better deal from society economically and better opportunities that are seemingly, although it's arguable, but seemingly offered by those parties to the left of politics. So what party is socially conservative but economically favours the lower socioeconomic groups over the higher socioeconomic groups? That's right, there isn't one. And that's where a radical party could come in. Labour and the Lib Dems and the Conservative Party are socially progressive. There is no socially conservative party, conservative party anymore, really. I mean, you are kidding me if you think that Cameron's Conservative Party or May's Conservative Party were socially conservative. Economically, yes, but Blairite progressive socially, obviously. I mean, who brought in gay marriage? Cameron's Conservative Party. He didn't have to. So there is a void to be stepped into by a totally new party, untainted by this fiasco, to promise less social change, less immigration, and more power and financial distribution to the lower socioeconomic groups. Unless, of course, one of the main parties, as in fairness Blair did, can convince enough people that their vision will encompass their hopes and their fears and their aspirations. Enough disparate thinking groups in society to form an unofficial coalition of the electorate. Now, these issues in society existed before the referendum. They were just covered up behind the traditional political tribal allegiances. What the EU referendum showed, what it gave was a chance for those repressed problems, those repressed ideas to come to the fore in that referendum. So it's been a mess politically since the referendum. It was a mess immediately before, with everyone saying different things and both sides basically saying whatever they felt they needed to say to get people to vote for them. Project Fear clearly failed. The economic Project Fear of the Remain camp clearly failed. Clearly, there were plenty of people that said, I don't believe your Project Fear will be I don't believe economically it will be as bad as you say. Even if it isn't that good, I think it's worth it. So it was a mess in the lead up to the referendum. It's been a mess since, a real mess since, and it looks like being a mess for some time to come. What the answers are, I don't exactly profess to know, but we need to be very mindful of the serious divide, social, economic, and democratic divide that is being displayed in our country at the moment. And we can't just bulldozer on, saying, I'm right, my side's right, so I don't care what the consequences are. The most important thing is that we win at all costs. I just don't think that can be the right approach. We have to find some kind of compromise within our own country, and then we'll deal with the EU. The EU are never going to be helpful in this because they don't want us to go. But they see it in their interests to muddy the waters, to say one thing one next, then hint something else the next. You know, we have to sort this out within our own country one way or another, I think. Maybe a second referendum is required, as long as all parties accept that if the second referendum says leave again, then that's what's going to happen. And if the EU don't play ball with a decent deal, then that will have to mean leave with no deal. You just can't carry on pretending that unless we leave with a deal, people don't want to leave. I think that's what you might like to think. I have a horrible feeling that that's not the case. I think a lot of people would be perfectly prepared to leave with no deal, because it's the economic problems were not the issues that made them vote leave, not primarily. Love to hear your views. Thanks for watching.